Fans, Merry Christmas, and welcome to Working Fans Comedycast episode 46. If you're watching this live, you'll realize it ain't fucking Christmas yet, but we're getting stuff done ahead of time, stockpiling, if you will. Now, after the intro video, I'll bring in Dave, and we're going to talk about this year in the Comedycast.
Are you a fan of pro wrestling, comedy, and combat sports? Then we have the podcast for you, because we cover that and much, much more.
Do you like to debate with your friends? Do we have the perfect segment for you? It's the 531, where we take any given subject, break it down to a top 5. From there, we debate it down to 3, and then into that number 1 spot.
If you want to get a hold of us, find us on our social medias. Search Working Fans Podcast on any major social media platform. And if you want to find the podcast, search for us on any major podcast platform, as well as YouTube.
Working Fans Podcast. We put in the work so you don't have to.
Well, fans, if you are watching this live, 2021 has not quite yet ended. You got this on the podcast feed. Shit, it's 3 days away. And since we're taking the holidays off from releasing like a content episode, we're going to be doing year-end episodes. And I think the Comedycast might have the wildest year-end episode just because it's pretty much all been this year. It was one of those things we expanded on when we got into this year, and we almost gave up on it at one point. Dave, tell us about the start of the year. Why did you want to start a Comedycast?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm kind of the reason why we started and gave up for a little while. So, I'll take the credit and the blame. So let's start off with the credit. I thought that at the time when we were doing the wrestling podcast, although I was still enjoying it, honestly, I'm going to be real. I can be real for a minute, son.
I remember part of it, Joe. I thought
you might have been getting a little burned out at the time. And I thought that you were getting burned out as a wrestling fan. And I thought, you know what? Joe could benefit from a little bit of comedy. AJ would probably like to do something different when we have him on. And by the way, at that point, it was like whenever we got AJ on, who's been doing.
We'll come back to that story later. Yeah. That fits into maybe a little bit of the blame as well.
And I also thought, you know what? I can use this genre for my friends who aren't wrestling fans and maybe try to tap into them a little bit too to get lists and some of that audience. And I thought, a lot of people like comedy. I thought this would be something different. So it was this kind of way to branch out and do something different and maybe give us, as Bruce Pritchard would say, a fresh paint of coat.
And we definitely, late last year, I was at that job I hated. I think I was just burned out in general. And God, if I had stayed at that job, we probably wouldn't have put out as regular a recording schedule as we did. And it might not have even made it this year because I definitely wanted to start talking something else. Like, we like talking wrestling. That's what we built ourselves on. That will always be the main part of our focus. But we like stand-up comedy. We like comedy movies. We like MMA. We've even included some live stuff in here. We've had hip-hop for the homeless over the last 2 years. But circling back to comedy, we started that to kind of do something new. And in our Spotify wrap-up this year, episode number 2, Nathan Wallace interview, that was our first episode of this year. And it feels like we've come so far from those early comedy interviews where we were mainly just kind of like what we do with wrestlers, picking up the up-and-coming comedians, getting them on the show.
Right.
Not knowing anything about them, but finding out a little about them throughout their interview.
Yeah, a little harder to get established comedians on, I feel like, because like wrestlers, there's enough wrestlers that were on TV that had certain runs, like Ricky Morton, Al Snow, that if we're fortunate enough to get them, they'll have some credibility. Whereas I feel like comedians, it's almost like we're kind of going to get the comedians who are just starting out, because we're not going to get a Dane Cook, a Dave Chappelle. We're not going to get an established huge name comedian, most likely.
We did get Mike Lawrence, who
True.
I was happy to get. We got him kind of on that wrestling comedy border.
Yeah.
Another person, Scott Chaplin, not a huge comedian, but somebody who I'm not even familiar with his comedy. I'm familiar with his podcasting. Now, what do you think was the interview that surprised you the most of the comedy ones this year?
Oh, it's a layup. You know that. Suit Man, Dante Barnett, like that guy. I didn't know much about him, and like he just brought it. I mean, he had so much to talk about. I mean, all the work he does, like trying to do comedies for like autistic kids, for deaf people.
His representation in comedy is amazing.
Yeah. I'd like to get him maybe back on one more time and do something with him, because he's a powerhouse. I hope he's doing well. You can tell like he wears his heart on his sleeve, especially if you hear the first interview, but that was an interview where he kind of took over the first one too. Like he's just a force.
Yeah, he was more subdued the second one, I think, but still like a really interesting guy. Like, and what he does to kind of speak up for people that are mostly overlooked, that's something admirable in what he does. And God, if we want to get into the biggest interview I'd say for me was between Mike Lawrence and Scott Chaplin. I'm a big fan of the Wrestle Roast podcast, but one that was fun was Dame FK, guy that I worked with for a little bit over this summer, found out he was a comedian, watched him do comedy. And then just after that, we caught him when he was doing his tour of England.
So I was going to talk to, and we did go actually to a live show with AJ. We got to meet some comedians too.
Oh, Marcelino Moose Hill was amazing. Daryl Roseman was great.
But before we talk, I almost want to say that was kind of the start of almost getting back into comedy, wasn't it? After we took our break.
Most likely, yes. I can't remember when exactly the break happened this year, because we don't take, like, when we start a show, we generally will come up with and put out a show that we think we can deliver every week. Yeah. You've seen a couple segments here and there that have died on the vine, but mostly, like, if we're putting it out, we feel confident we can deliver. Yeah. And I believe the comedy might have hit a snag before that, but AJ wanted to get back out and doing shows. We did the live interviews right in the kind of the side area right there. And I would say I think that was the getting back into it.
Yeah, and the thing was we started to get burnt out. AJ was kind of absent for a lot of this time. It was just me and Joe. A lot of people know I talk a lot of shit on this. I'm an over communicator. I talk. I have a girl in my life now who's very busy, and we were doing wrestling, comedy. Did we add MMA yet already too, or did we
added MMA? And I think around that time was when there was some interpersonal issues, and we kind of were. My help was required more on the wrestling podcast.
Right.
And it just made the comedy one. Like, there were weeks where we were putting out not shitty episodes, but we gave you a base level like effort, and we didn't do it on purpose because our goal is always to entertain and deliver. But at that time, we almost didn't know when to kind of say like, hey, maybe we should put this off.
Wrestling is a partnership. So, and I think,
and we get more help with the MMA podcast. So that one almost does itself.
And Chevy is he's go-to. He's there. He's a good communicator. And AJ has made a really great comeback too. I feel like I have to say that if we're gonna like talk about this. But at the time, AJ just kind of had more of a lackadaisical approach to this. And
clearly a second option for him a lot of the times, and that led us to being the idea factory, the producers, the stars, like almost everything involved with it.
Yeah, and as he said too, like he said he kind of approached it as a hobby, not as a business. And now for him, he's approaching it as a business, and that changes his mindset. Me and you kind of look at it kind of like a labor of love. Like it's a business too, but like it's our passion, and we're not going to make a ton of money off
We
of
also we understand that in entertainment, a lot of things are done on spec. You put out a product, you put it out there, you hope to build the name up big enough where eventually someday you can profit off it or that it will pay off. So
Right.
it's a hobby that has to be treated like a business to get to success.
Yeah, I've never.
And we don't know where we're going to be on that, but we realized it earlier than AJ that kind of importancy, that work ethic has to be there for this.
I won't. All right. So this is a great example, and this is the last. I'm not because I don't want to make this about knocking him, but I will give an example of like our mindset into this.
And we're also, after we finish knocking him, we are going to talk about the rebound from this because, as you've seen, the Comedycast has been more successful. So this does have a happy ending, even though we have to give you guys
whole
the dark
story.
days that were in the middle.
Whole story. You get the whole ass here. I remember for me, I guess this goes back even a little further, where I knew me and AJ might be a little different mindset. Was we had an interview with a wrestler, Ken Anderson, and Joe was working at his job at the time, and I had this shitty phone, and we were doing our interviews on our phones. So I always had one of the guys with me on interviews back then because I didn't have good phone quality, and so it'd have to be either Joe or AJ. Well, AJ lived far from me and stuff, but what happened was we had an interview with Ken Anderson, and then he said that I can't make it, and I have an issue in my car. My first thing was, where are you? I'll come get you, and we'll get you back. No response. I don't know what was happening, but that was not what he wanted to hear. But I was not going to allow us not to get this interview. So when Joe says we have to treat it like a business, like I went out, I bought myself a little track phone. I only used it for that interview. I basically like said, okay, we're going to do this. And I called him on that phone and I recorded on the app I had in my phone, and then just got the interview done. Because to me, it was like, this guy is donating to me his time. And I take that very seriously. And I approach this like a job in that respect, that if you're giving me your time, I'm going to do everything I can. And I've, knock on this wooden desk or this hard wooden chair that hurts my ass. Shout out to AJ for telling about these wooden chairs. Yeah, I don't miss interviews, and I'll try not to in the future.
Yeah. And all right, so we're to the point during the summer. We took a break. We did the comedy show.
Worked out, so we needed to take a break because we weren't producing what we wanted to do. We had help on MMA, but I knew that if I have to pick, it was going to be wrestling over comedy. So we were going to do wrestling and we're doing wrestling and MMA, and then
what was the list that you and AJ did? That was was it a wrestling list or was it a comedy list? That was just the absolute rock bottom of the comedy.
Prop comedy.
That was the most AJ mailing it in thing that we had seen. And that's when Dave was like, we got to be done with this. And while I thought it was good, I think the comedy gives us our most universality, makes us the most interesting to more people. So we started writing up monthly schedules at that point. We really had to talk with AJ because I wouldn't say it was coming to a breaking point, but there were definitely issues and certain moves were made kind of within how we did things.
Yeah.
And it was right around that time that AJ talked to us, and he did say he wasn't treating it the same way we were. And now we might have noticed a little hard feelings there too.
Yeah. Right now, AJ is mostly on the wrestling podcast. Not to say he won't be on the comedy, but he was on the holiday comedy hour because we are doing even more stuff. Right? We get together once a month. We did our first beer cast. And as you know, AJ was a part of that. And he did our holiday comedy list with us too. And AJ might be on a future comedy episode too.
We will be on them. Mainly our setup now has been AJ and Dave on wrestling, me and Dave on comedy.
Me and Chevy
and Dave on Comedycast.
I got to get this based on everything, motherfuckers.
And it's mainly because Dave's the most reliable one. there was a moment there where when we were at our lowest with AJ, I mean, I haven't said it before, but I didn't want to work with him there for a little bit just because I'm not going to kick him off his own creation, but when I can see that you're not giving us the effort that every one of us puts in, that was a point where I'm like, Dave, I'm just going to separate myself from that situation.
Mhm.
And it was right around that time where AJ came around, and we have been doing more collaborating. I think our communication has gotten a lot better,
Way better.
and you can see it in the efforts in each podcast.
Yeah, even like this weekend or next weekend. So as we're recording this, AJ, we're hoping to all get together. And AJ let me know in advance. Hey, work changed my schedule on this day. I can do the following day if possible. If that works for you, let me know. I want to do it. And it's the first time I can really say I remember too, where he's letting me know in advance now. Hey, I can't do this, and let me know. He's giving me definitive
Yeah,
answer.
we used to get like days notice where it's like,
Right,
all right, I'll do double the work to cover up for this.
right.
And I think that's where it would get me pissed because like when AJ doesn't show up, I have to make up 5-3-1 lists sometimes. And
By the way, we did learn too that AJ's a decent MC. Like when he went to that show, we thought too. I mean, this is
yeah, we're sick of hearing his like little jokes when we're on here and he's trying to pop us, and we're like, that's where we got worried. We were like, oh man, is he gonna be funny on stage? Like, are we too close to it?
Mhm.
And the man's a comedian. That is one thing he cannot lie to you about, is that when he gets up there and has that mic in his hands, he can definitely pull it off.
Yeah. I
And
know we went to
too.
wondering it was going to be a shit show. Like,
Yeah, and he got offended by that. And for me, it's like, we hear your jokes all the time. So we're like, yeah, you're funny. You're hilarious, man. But then when he goes up in front of a crowd, you're like, oh man, is that going to work out for him? Like, how's that going to be?
Yeah, it was interesting. It was fun interviewing those guys live too. Like for me, like at the actual venue, it was definitely a different type feel, almost a studio. Like I hope someday we can do more of that at some point, interviewing actual guests, like in an in studio type environment.
Yeah, that was one thing. Like Dame FK challenged us on his interview to try putting on a show, and it's an idea we kicked around. I think we would like to do it in 2022, but it's just going to be figuring it out. Like we have asked questions, we've done some of the preliminary work.
Yeah,
we hope to bring it to you, but it's
I
things
would
like
love
that.
it was a goal I didn't know I wanted until he mentioned it, and I'm like, yeah, that does sound pretty cool. Throwing on a live show, I'd have fun with that.
Yeah, and then when he mentions it and you talk to other people that put on shows and you realize almost how attainable a goal that is,
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely something we'd like to do, but we got to see. Still coming out of a COVID era, it's a risky proposition,
Variants.
and it's almost like with anything we do, we try and make something that's gonna come out every week or that's gonna be a success. We don't come up with ideas to let them fail.
Now we haven't recorded sketch comedy yet this year. We're going to do that.
That's gonna be, if you're hearing this on the podcast episode, that will have been the last episode.
Right, you'll hear
if you're
that.
Hearing this live, we're gonna record this in the future. We're trying some new stuff out here.
Well, the reason why I brought it up though is because I wanted to ask you, what was your favorite topic we covered this year?
Oh, my favorite topic. I think it was sketch comedy, and that's why we held the list so long. We got these lists maybe 5 months ago,
Okay.
and I wanted to make it a big involved episode where almost like I did with the romantic comedy episode where we talk about some of the movies, but we realized one, that might be a little over our audience's heads for one episode, and that will actually come into next year's plans when we get into next year's plans.
What was
But
your favorite in execution? Because we haven't executed that yet though.
Chappelle Show and Eddie Murphy, I think, were two of the smoother ones. And when we advertised them, they got good numbers.
Yeah. No, I enjoyed those. That would definitely been mine too. I had the most fun. But you could tell I had the most fun of those. Another thing too was, and this will talk about why the format is going to be a little different in the coming year too. One of the other reasons we took a break is we were starting to really not being able to come up with lists for 5-3-1s. We were running out of topics fast.
Yeah, that prop comedy was maybe the first kind of bump in the road where we saw that particular subject didn't get as good a response for us. I would argue romantic comedies, but we learned to make a good out of a bad situation by that point.
And I think too, Chevy deserves some credit too, because once we started having meetings where Chevy was involved too, he was able to like also help out with lists and stuff, and thus Leslie Nielsen movies was born, which turns out.
Oh wow, Leslie Nielsen, that was another one where like, who the fuck picked this? Like, I think this is where we're running out of ideas.
but there was a market for it. It just wasn't me and Joe's market. But we did down and we had fun with it.
And that's why we ended this year on sketch comedy shows. And when we begin next year, we are going to do a complete year of comedy movie reviews. We've got the movies plotted out. In time, we will release them. We will get your comments on them because that'll be added to the show.
Maybe some interviews still.
Oh, we'll still do interviews. We will still have 5-3-1s. We're still going to try and get as many interviews as possible, but we were having trouble with the 5-3-1s, and we didn't want to deliver a weekly show where we felt we struggled.
Here's what we'll do. I think I'm going to throw this out there to you right now as we're live and recording this at the same time. We'll have a year of movies. We'll definitely still strive to get interviews. As far as 5-3-1s, I'm going to do this. I'm going to say I'm going to give the ball to the people. Me and Joe, because we don't want to get burned out on this, we'll definitely have 5-3-1s back in 2023. We ain't going nowhere, folks. We're going to be here till one of us is fucking dead. All right. And when that comes up, we might start to circle and go back, do volume 2 of different ones. But in the meantime, for the people, if you got ideas for 5-3-1s and we haven't done it, hit us up, throw it at us. We'll either do it in an episode, we'll add it on to an episode, maybe a bonus episode, whatever. But we will throw it out and we'll get it done. But it's on you. If you want it in 2022, you come to us. You do some fucking work. Right?
Yeah, because we really tried. We got out as many as possible. We did get some suggestions. We would love more because the Comedycast is fun. I feel like at some point we're going to add another show to this mix once we get comfortable. But like we're starting to plot out next year now because we're treating this not a little more like a business, but like with a little more seriousness. Me and Dave have always been serious. If you know where you're going, it's easier to advertise. It's easier to preview. There's a lot of little things we didn't do over time.
I'll tell you a story. I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, who's got 5 kids, as we talked about in the show. And I have, I'm busy too. And she always tells me how busy I am. And she's like, how many episodes do you do a week on your podcast? And I'm like, 3. And I was like 4 if you count the live show. She's like, you do 3? She's like, that's a lot. I was like, yeah, I guess so. And she goes, most sitcoms only come out, they have like 1 episode a week, right? And I was like, you got a fucking point.
We are like producing 3 sitcoms a week almost.
Yeah, we're doing 3 shows a week. And
that's why I think it helps to have it divided up amongst people. That way Dave is the one we're making work all the time, but he doesn't have to come up with all the ideas on his own.
No, definitely not. That's it. I mean, I'm most people track down interviews when I can. Joe's helped me out a little bit with that this year. And I'll be in every segment and pretty much I'll do a lot of the social media in terms of links and stuff like that. Joe will do a lot of the other social media. If you see an Instagram story or a Facebook story, that's Joe. That's not me. If you see a direct post with a link, it's usually me, but sometimes it's Joe too.
I'm not proud to say, but if you see something make its way over from TikTok, that is also me. We are learning that as a necessity of the podcast. That's another thing we've really tried to do is we expanded our subject matter so we could talk more, but now we also have to expand our social media game to advertise more. That's something that I think we all know we could get better at, and we have been trying, but it's just working on stepping it up over the year.
Yeah, just living, learning the ropes. But yeah, we're super busy. We're gonna be earning that. We got personal lives. We got fucking work lives. And hey, as Joe says, yeah, I might be running around all 3D shows, but Joe's producing all this shit too, folks. So we're busy fucking people, but we enjoy.
Oh yeah, we're the guru and premiere of this shit, Gangstar. What?
Yeah. Oh man.
Now, God, what else do we have to say about the Comedy Cast? We previewed next year. We talked about this year. Guys, leave us anytime if you have a comedy, something you want to see us cover on the Comedy Cast, leave it in the suggestions, leave it in the email. Guys, we got shirts to sell. Like, get familiar with the Working Fans podcast. Share this with people. And we're going to be doing this a lot more. We'll be recording our podcast segments, maybe even putting them up as live videos so you can see them in the moment.
You're going to see more live content this year. We're starting to get the hang of that now. So definitely see more live comedy. You're going to see more live wrestling. I won't say you'll see more live MMA for sure. I don't know a Chevy schedule, but you might see some of that too. But you're going to see more live content for sure.
100%. Now, Dave, final. It's funny. I want to drag it out more, but I feel like we've hit our moment. Any final thoughts on the Comedy Cast?
It's been a fun, wild ride. It's been challenging, but I'm glad you talked me back into doing it. I'll give you props for that. And I think it's another outlet, and it's definitely created some fun and interesting moments. I'm looking forward to see what 2022 brings and what else the Comedy Cast, the wrestling, and the MMA all brings. It's always
100%. Now, guys, we are happy to have you join us on the Comedy Cast. This is the year-end special. 2021's over. Let's get wild. Let's have a good New Year's Eve. 2022's coming, and we'll sit down and we'll be talking comedy movies all of next year.